coming out today. We're very glad to have heard multiple times, but we're still really, really grateful to all of you, so thank you. My name is Kalina, I'm one of the organizers of the conference, and I'm really pleased to welcome you to this first installment of the Ecosystems of Change panel. So as you might have noticed, we have actually two sub-panels of this panel. We felt like this was a super interesting topic. We had some amazing speakers that wanted to come in and speak, so we decided it would be a great idea to have two separate panels and kind of discuss this from various angles. So we'll have our panel now, and then we'll have a short break for coffee, and then we'll have the second half in the last session of the conference. So now, without further ado, I'll hand it over to Neil, who is our moderator for today. And I'll let you introduce yourself briefly.
I think everyone hear me okay? So, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon for our panel. The purpose of this discussion is really to explore the role of cross-sector collaboration in advancing social enterprise, both in the United States and abroad. What role does it play in scaling social impact and creating shared value? I'm the executive director of a nonprofit research organization called the Intersector Project, and we study cross-sector collaboration across America. And I can tell you that we have a wonderful panel. It's going to be great to hear the perspectives of these professionals. And I will just let them introduce themselves and say who they're with and what they do.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jerry O'Dwyer. Thank you for braving the weather here. So nice to meet everyone. I'm a partner with Deloitte Consulting, and the reason I'm here is I guess I run a social enterprise within Deloitte. We just started up our own social impact consultancy. I'm fortunate enough to lead that, so I'm listening and learning as much as you are here today. So please be with me.
Hi, my name is Sujeen Lee, and I'm the SVP of Corporate Affairs at Chobani, which is a Greek broker plan based in the U.S., and I oversee corporate social responsibility as well as the Chobani Foundation.
My name is Sebastian Fries. I am the Chief Giving Officer at Tom's Shoes in Los Angeles, which I miss a little bit right now. And before that, I worked at Pfizer Pharmaceuticals in emerging markets and strategy, business development, and access to medicines. Been at Tom's for about 3.5 years.
So we'll start the panel. I have a few questions for our panelists, and then we will be sure to get to Pigeonhole, which I know everyone is very excited about. And we'll get those questions in before we pause. So why don't we start, and this is a question for each panelist. Can you share with us how your organization works with other sectors to address issues of public concern?
Yeah, I guess I'll start. So I'm in a direct client service role, so from a Deloitte perspective, we have practices in all the social sector, the Monetary Institute, we have the private sector, the term part of the S&O practice, and then we have a large government practice. And what we're finding is, and the reason for we launched this business is that we're seeing increasingly much more demand by our clients to address, as we've heard about this morning, wicked problems. We call them wicked opportunities, but the solutions to those are generally from cross-sector collaboration. So, frankly, we follow and serve our clients, and that's where our clients are really either need to want to be led or lead us. So, we're seeing just an incredible set of trends forward in that direction.
Yeah, at Chobani, I think that it's a multiple approach to social impact. So one of the things that I think sets this company apart from some of the other large consumer packaged goods and food companies out there is that we view ourselves as a very mission-led company. So, for example, a commitment to using certain types of ingredients and making our products a certain way is very embedded within the core vision of the business itself and is a driver for the profit-making part of the business. But beyond that, I think that in that, and part of that philosophy, of that business philosophy is to also contribute actively to the communities in which we have a physical presence. So we work very closely with local organizations in the places where we have a manufacturing facility. So that's Central New York and Twin Falls, Idaho, as well as New York City, where our corporate office is based, to give local community grants to organizations that are making a positive impact on the community. So a national level, we're also looking into doing initiatives that try to raise the profile of understanding what you need and where it comes from, particularly among youth. So it's, I think we try to think of it in a multi-pronged approach.
Can you guys hear us okay, or do we need to use the mic? Mic?
Yeah, the second gentleman particularly in Turkey's, the mic.
Thank you.
Voice is necessary.
Is this okay? Yeah, better. Okay, so at Tom's, just for those who don't know that basic business model, our business model was based from the minute we started on a mission, purpose-driven strategy. Very simple. You buy a pair of shoes, and we give a pair of shoes. So this in 2014 we had 35 million pairs of shoes given, and so in terms of collaboration, our business model wouldn't work unless we had significant collaboration, specifically with the non-for-profit sector. So now we're working with over 130 non-for-profits in 70 countries. So those are large multinationals like UNICEF, Save the Children, and others, and also small local. So it's sort of absolutely critical for us to have a mindset towards collaboration. But you know, when I thought about that question and how collaboration sort of manifests itself in a more complex sort of strategic environment, I thought about what we did in 2013 and 14 in Haiti, where we decided that we wouldn't make our sort of giving shoes, which are specifically manufactured for this purpose, in China exclusively, and Jerry knows this from us working together on this, but we ended up investing in Haiti. And so in a way, because of what happened in Haiti, there's actually no shoe industry left in Haiti until we decided to manufacture those shoes. But in order to get that plant up and running, which now has close to 50 workers, and we last year manufactured close to 500,000 pairs of shoes in Haiti, we had to do a couple things in terms of collaboration. One was we needed to understand demand. And demand is essentially local demand for the giving shoes. So that meant collaboration with IMA World Health and Partners in Health to understand, it's like, how do they operate in Haiti and how do the shoes help? For instance, we're coupled up with deworming programs to prevent worm infection in children. And that's one way we can slot in with IMA World Health. So that was demand. Government was very important. If you set up a factory in Haiti, you have to work very closely with the government and collaborate with them. We're in a free zone, a free trade zone outside of Port-au-Prince, but that took quite some time. And so that meant understanding how government operates, what are sort of the local laws and so forth, that kind of stuff. Workforce. Most of the Haitian workforce that we looked at had never worked in the formal economy before. So we had to figure out, how do we collaborate with our workforce to actually make these shoes? And just an anecdote, what we found out very recently was when we talked to our workers, they said, our paycheck is not what we expected it to be. We're like, why? We couldn't quite understand. They said, are we not paying you what we promised you? It's like, they said, no, you're not paying us what you promised us. And then we looked at it and said, oh, just like in the US, income taxes are withheld. But since people have never worked in the formal economy, they thought we were robbing them by not paying them full wages. So it's like you have to really collaborate with the local workforce and say, teach them, educate them, and see what it's like to actually be, migrate from informal to formal economy. And then in terms of the private sector, there's other collaboration going on. Haiti has a bit of an initiative right now launched by the president about getting other companies interested in investing, and they want to sort of use the Tom's example as a catalyst to get other companies get interested in investing. So that means collaboration for us with other companies as well.
Increasingly, we see cross-sector collaboration used by nonprofit organizations, businesses, and increasingly the public sector. One of the secret sauces of cross-sector collaboration is sharing decision-making. This is something that we've seen as one of the more effective ways of building legitimacy, meaningfully engaging with partners, but in practice, it is very difficult to do. It sounds nice in theory. From your experience in working with partners from other sectors, Can you share some ideas on tactics that allowed you to be successful in working with, whether it be nonprofit partners in distribution or other partners throughout a supply chain, and what you've seen work as well?
I think that, and this is something that I think is so true of really any arrangement, is that trying to find the outcomes that is win-win for all parties. I think that for us, one example where I think that it went very, very well is a significant partnership that Chobani has done with Discovery Education, very different sector, and we both realized that we could do something great together. So Discovery Education is basically the education arm of Discovery, the cable network, and as the media landscape has evolved and changed so rapidly over the last several years, I think media companies are looking for new and different revenue streams. So Discovery Education basically identifies ways to partner with different companies to create branded content. But they have a very mission-driven vision as well. And so rather than, say, doing branded content that feels commercially, they identify truly meaningful and important educational topics, and then identify partners that can have that expertise and provide the content. So for example, they've partnered with everyone from Google to teach more kids about the importance of STEM education, to get more students interested in STEM, all the way through to partners like Toyota to develop content around safer driving. So because for Chobani, healthy eating and a healthy lifestyle is one of our core themes that we want to educate particularly youth on in a more creative, more engaging way, we thought, wouldn't it be exciting to develop educational curriculum, very interactive, cutting-edge, state-of-the-art digital content that basically educated youth K through 12 on nutrition and entrepreneurship, which are the things that I think really Chobani feels is our bread and butter. We're a very entrepreneurial company, and we try to make food using healthy, natural ingredients. So we did that, and it's clearly just a win-win for both partners. And I think that because the goals were so aligned, it truly has been a partnership. And we're about 2/3 of the way through from K through 8. And all of the content has been launched online. You can access it at recipeforinnovation.com, and we are in our final chapter of this partnership to develop all the high school curriculum. And so I think that finding ways for each of the partners to really be excited and to be incentivized to work together has been hugely successful for us.
Sebastian and I were talking about this at lunch. So one of the projects I'm working on now is for one of the largest relief agencies. And what we find is there's more and more private capital that is wanting to be put to use to help innovate in the humanitarian sector that wants to help. But what they've come across is a very resistant humanitarian sector. It's almost an oligopoly if you think about it. So in terms of lessons learned, I would say that understanding each other's motives and getting that on the table. There, at least in this client setting, there's truly multilateral, multi-party, and we started literally the conversation on the project and how we would execute doing what needed to be done with probably about 2 full days of this discussion around what defines success, what is the role of each party for each of the sectors, and having clear transparency and communication around that. I wish I'd learned this 20 years ago in my consulting career. It would have saved me a lot of time and probably clients a lot of fees. But I would say that getting understanding the motives, having complete transparency about what's going to be done, where will the benefits accrue, where are the issues. And especially I think about the work you and I did together in some of the works for Tom's. It's that what you described in Haiti resonates there. What we did in Ethiopia resonates as well. So I'd say clearly having a definition of clear understanding of motives, transparency, and frankly, it's based on trite, over communication. You can't do enough of that, so.
Yeah, on that theme, when I was thinking about challenges and examples of a tactic that we use, what came to mind was when I joined Tom's, we couldn't scale. We couldn't scale giving. And the basic problem was that the business was growing at a rate where the giving internal sort of organization wasn't prepared to actually collaborate at that level with the non-for-profits. So what we found out was that essentially when you started to go to some of the non-gift in kind non-for-profits, that they didn't want the shoes. Sometimes I get the questions like, isn't your phone ringing off the hook? Everybody wants these shoes. Like, no. And so maybe that's surprising, right? But when you then start talking, and to your point, when you start talking to the organizations, you start realizing, wow, your objectives are, UNICEF, focus on children, and what, objective ABCs, shoes don't play a role. You talk to UNHCR, the refugee agency, they focus on X. So very often you find that the objectives seem to be apart. So what we did was we then really started to sort of have a team. I hired a team of people who know the space much better. And we started having conversations to figure out, is there a potential overlap? And after a few conversations, it became very, very clear that for some there was, and once you had it, it was very meaningful. And for some, there was never going to be an overlap. And then you just let it go. But what we found was just an example that if we started to really have a selling proposition to partners, if we had a value proposition that fit with what they are in business for, then the conversation changes. And I can give you examples of what that was, but it took us a little while to figure that out. And I think sometimes there's a bit of a certain ignorance on the for-profit sector as well as on the non-for-profit sector as how to even get the conversation going. Because the perception is non-for-profits only want a big check so that from the CSR department, and from the profit sector it's like, well, don't know really what they do, but they make good material for the annual CSR report. That sounds good. Reputation protection. No, I think what we're observing now is that is changing, but you have to be very conscious of each other's core objectives.
From your experience in participating in successful cross-sector collaborations and also enduring the challenges, what are your thoughts on the limits to cross-sector collaboration? One of the things with the Intersector project we've noticed, I'll give you guys a moment to think about that. One of the things we've noticed is there is an abundance of resources that highlights best practices for cross-sector collaboration. But in the absence of studying the limits, the failed cases, we really can't understand what conditions are necessary for success. And there's an importance to understand and learn from the counterfactuals. This is something that we're working on, but it's also something that's difficult to identify and difficult to research. But we think that in order for this field to move forward and mature, we need to have some understanding of the limits. Any thoughts?
I would build on something Sebastian said, and it really comes, sometimes the limits are best overcome by reframing the question. And I think you did that at Tom's very successfully, which was, let's not go with our Tom's value proposition. Let's go and try and understand what the NGO needs and ultimately the child or customer that they serve. And I think about malaria. I'm struck by the quote of Bill Gates when he said, I don't view malaria as a wicked problem. I view it as a wicked opportunity. And it's sort of counterintuitive, and people sort of took that as they sort of took a step back and said, well, he goes, think about it. Between 2009 and 2013, we actually reduced. When we were going to get behind this, they actually reduced malaria by 42%. So I think some part of understanding the limits is reframing the question and just see how far you can go. Sometimes you don't know the limits until you get there. So I don't know if that's helpful. That's a
Yeah, and I
think that also it's just recognizing that your priorities may not be another party's priorities. So while you may be extremely eager to get a certain achievement done because it seems so obvious and so value creative to you, the party that you're working with, you know, it may not. They may have 10 other things that they are working on. I mean, to give you an example, so this is thinking about collaboration between you know, business and government. So it's a bit of a technical example, but you know, Greek yogurt is a very different type of yogurt than regular yogurt. It's much thicker, so it has just by definition more protein. So if you look at dietary guidelines, there's not an actual official category for Greek yogurt, so you don't get the same crediting. So there is you know, a desire to get the proper crediting for Greek yogurt because that has implications for, you know, school lunch programs and all of that. And so for our company, would be a huge goal that we would like to get done quicker. And I think that in the landscape of food and government, it may not be the #1 priority. So I think that that's going to be an inevitable limitation where whether, you know, in a collaborative environment where you're working with very different stakeholders across, you know, a complicated landscape, you might want to hurry up and get things done, and it just may not get done as quickly as you like.
That's a good example. I mean, two things come to mind. One is, I think sometimes partners have. It's hard for partners to say no, or say like, look, we're at this end now, it's not working anymore. There are a lot of partnerships out there where I feel like they're dragging on and they're sort of on paper. At some point, someone just has to, you know, say it's not successful. So the ability to say no and cut it off, I think, is important. Because otherwise you have too many bad examples out there where things are not moving forward. And that sits institutionally then with the companies and the other partners saying like, oh, that really didn't work. So, the other one I think is a bit of a short-term versus a long-term piece. I think a limit to collaboration is short-term thinking. Because sometimes, especially when you're pretty far apart, it just takes a little while.
One of the things, we've done 40 case studies of cross-sector collaboration in the United States. The biggest common aspect is most cross-sector collaborations take significantly longer than everyone expected. And so managing expectations of process and results is imperative to success. I want to ask one more question, then we'll take a look at Pigeonhole. From your experience, and some of you have experience across multiple sectors, how do you think leaders from government, business, and the nonprofit sector think about cross-sector collaboration differently? Or do you view it as they think about it the same way?
It was government.
How business, government, and the nonprofit sector thinks about collaboration. Do you think about it the same way, differently?
Recent examples. I have a project that is bringing actors from each of the sectors. There is inherent distrust from the social sector to the private sector. The government sector, they have, their view is we actually do have a role to serve and we're here to help, but there are inherent limits that we have, whether it's funding, whether it's their reach, etc. So I think the nonprofits and the foundations that I work with, their philosophy has been, let us incubate, let us test what works, and we'll get to a certain scale. But it is the role of government and the private sector to get it to scale. The role of government is one of service and one of service to its citizens, and it has to pick and choose among an enormous number of issues that its citizenry is asking for assistance with or some type of leadership from. So they're picking and have to make choices. And the private sector is trying to figure out, where is there a combination of a mutuality of interest in terms of service, but also either, depending on their kind of corporate structure, some type of profit, or some, whether that goes back to the shareholder or goes back to their communities. So I think there is a constant dance, if you will, about on a particular issue, whether it's a health issue, an income inequality issue, of their roles. But I think we'll back down to it is social sector views itself as one as incubating and trying to innovate. Government is trying to get it to scale, and where the private sector is, there's a role to serve, because frankly, government's not getting things done fast enough that serve their stakeholders and consumers and their parties as well. So I think they're still sorting that out, but if I were to generalize, that's how I would sort of think through the equation.
What would you take? Thinking about that, it's an interesting question, right? What came to my mind was that ultimately, my sense is that still non-for-profits undersell themselves. So instead of aiming for the chief marketing officer, instead of aiming for the chief strategy officer, and instead of aiming for the new business development person within a corporation, they head straight to CSR, corporate affairs, and so forth. And as a result, the discussion is very different. And on the flip side, I think those corporate leaders are also don't really know how, in some cases, not everybody, I think for you guys it's different, there's some companies where it's different, but they don't know even how to quite have that conversation. So it's not necessarily thinking differently, but aim a little higher, like what Bill Drayton talked a little bit on. That is, hotel company A versus B. If you want to really set the pace, then you better start thinking about it from a corporate level, how to kind of have a conversation. But then you want to have thought partners on the non-for-profit side who actually understand what is important from a company's strategic perspective. So I think we still have a lot of work to do.
Yeah, I think that I completely agree, and I think that just to maybe generalize a little bit, it really is about, I think, presenting the collaboration opportunity to all parties in a way that everyone, I think it's somewhat similar to something I mentioned earlier, which is that presenting in a way that they feel like they, the party, whatever the party is, whether it's a nonprofit organization or the business or the government, is getting what they want out of the deal. So in the most basic terms, it's just almost I think an approach towards negotiating or communicating the opportunity to each party in a way that they want to hear it. And it's if everyone can feel like they're getting what they need out of it, then it's probably going to happen, because it's and hopefully everyone is getting what they want out of it, which is why I think the win-win situations are always the best. I mean, it's been interesting. On another example I'll just mention is we at Chobani were putting together the first ever internal Chobani Women's Leadership Initiative, which is basically a conference that we're putting together for female employees to give them, a greater voice, a sense of inspiration and empowerment and connectivity. And in putting together the agenda for this conference, we actually reached out very deliberately to get very diverse cross-sector representation of amazing female speakers to come be a part of the program. And it has been really, I think, surprising to us, the organizers, how positive the response has been. So I think, and I mention this because I think when you pick a theme or a subject or a project that is able to touch upon something that is universal, or if it's not, to be communicated in a way that is, then the buy-in is immediate. So we have women coming from industries that have absolutely nothing to do with yogurt or food or consumer packaged goods, who are really volunteering their time to be part of this conversation about women's empowerment in corporate America. And I think there it's just, you know, we hit a chord on a theme that has universal appeal. But on topics that are not, you know, as universally appealing, it is really about communicating it to potential partners in a way that you make them hear.
Let's go to Pigeonhole and see what the leading question is. I think, Jerry, this is a specific question for you. I think we'd love to hear about how do you build a practice area like this in an organization like
It took me a year, quite honestly, to get the organization to understand why this business should exist. And it really came down to a couple emotional, well, some factual and some data-driven, but it comes down to an emotional belief that frankly, a firm like ours should have a voice on many of society's issues. And we are not just in the business of client service, and that we should have a greater aspiration to give back. And if you believe in that notion, and then sold it on the notion that there is, again, Sebastian and I were talking about this at lunch, there are several trends that we see that we're going to drive our clients there, so there will be a business. Third, if you think about, and this goes back to one of the trends, the millennials, more and more when I talk to young people on campus, whether they're in coming out of undergraduate or coming out of a graduate program, they aspire not only to do well, to do good for the world. That is a trend that is not a fad. So for us, if you think about the business that we're in, we are a very people-driven business. I guess all ours are, but ours is even more so, just given the kind of scale that we need. So for us, it resonated on campus as a wonderful recruiting and retention program. So this goes well beyond. This is not pro bono. This is a line of business where professionals who join us will have a career path for their career to be a partner or director with us. So we want to have something that was sustaining, something that gave back, something that all appealed to our higher purpose, not just making money or not just having great client projects and engagements, but actually making a difference. And we looked at the lens. What I said to our executives was, it's a partnership, so it's a pretty flat organization. I said, where would you want your child to work? An organization that aspires to do well in the world, and we can do that. And but it took a year, and it took a lot of conversation and socialization, which we don't need to get into.
Let's see one more. Time running for one more question. So, Sebastian, this one is specifically for you. You know, cross-sector collaborations in general, I think, are controversial, and they're still getting some scrutiny in the media as well as among practitioners. At Tom's, when you face certain challenges, how do you guys face up to them?
Yeah, it's that was an interesting journey, and for those of you who know, and I'm sure that's where the question came from, there was a bunch of criticism that came up when Tom started to get more successful and more scale. And I remember when I first talked to our founder about it, he said, look, when that first happened, he got defensive. And he said, what's going on? I'm just trying to do something positive, and all kinds of shit is getting loaded up on me. He's like, what is going on? Why? But I realized that ultimately, this is a very, very positive thing. As a young company, you have a choice. You could either get defensive and say, oh, no, you know, I don't want to listen to any critics or any criticism, or you flip this around and say, there's a lot to learn. If you're in the space of mission-driven, purpose-driven, and you're a business, you have an awful lot to learn. And there's an awful lot of smart people out there who may not understand your business, or may not even understand business, but they understand a lot about what it takes to make a difference in the world. And it'd be a huge mistake not to listen to them. So,
Well done.
which is not always easy, because it can get really, it can get to the core of things, and it's never black and white.
It's uncomfortable.
It's uncomfortable, and it's never black and white. It's not like this is right and this is wrong. You may, at some point, if you try to do something good, you may have some unforeseen or unintended consequences in communities where you serve. That's quite possible. And what we decided with this specific thing about manufacturing, for instance, was you're flooding the market with cheap shoes that fall apart and they come from China, right? So you put the local shoe sellers out of business. And we said, let's take this very seriously. And it took us a while to figure out how to do it, but then we decided we want to at least manufacture 1/3, and if possible more, of all the shoes that we manufacture, we'll manufacture in countries where we give. And so, proud to say, 2014, we're not even publicly, but we've reached that goal. And in 2014, we're going to go even beyond that. And that's happening in Kenya, in India, in Ethiopia, in Argentina. And then Haiti was really, really hard, but that's, you know, we're now attempting to sort of, we manufactured 500,000 pairs of shoes in Haiti last year, and there'll be more coming this year. 700 jobs created just manufacturing these shoes in country now. So these are the things, without the critics, we would not have started to realize that there's something we should do. So, love thy critics. I mean, really, get engaged, get out there, talk to them. And that doesn't mean you have to do everything that they want you to do, because there are limits. But at least, it's worth thinking about.
We actually have time for one last question, and I think it's a good question to end on. What are some examples of how you have engaged the communities you serve in the act of shared decision-making?
So I think that one of the things that Giovanni tries to do in terms of being a proactive part of the community is not only to support local nonprofits through grant making, but also to help the community grow. So something that we try to do that's not just philanthropy or community engagement is just proactive outreach to local elected officials to make sure that the communication is open and frequent. So you know, one project that surfaced from that open dialogue was the need for a community center. So down the street from our plant in central New York, there was a plot of land, and we literally, over the course of almost a year, built out a basic structure that now serves as a community center. And I think that was one of the more exciting, I think, community projects that we did. We got the whole community involved, we got our employees from the factory involved, and it was this blend of, you know, local government engagement, local community engagement, and philanthropy. So I think that using your local government officials as a great ally can be a very effective way to stay tuned into the communities where you actually have a physical presence.
So at Deloitte, we have a Deloitte Foundation. We do provide grants, but I think the most impactful thing we can do, particularly in response to this question, is we place a number of our professionals at all levels, whether there's new graduates, mid-career, you know, more senior folks on local organization boards. We think that's the most impactful thing we can do, because those are organizations that reside, or where we reside, and we're part of that community. So we try to take that from what can we do in our community when we're not traveling? What can we do to help influence and make a positive change, whether it's, you know, getting grassroots funding, to match funding from the Deloitte Foundation for a new food bank, but then actually having people from Deloitte and all their friends. And it's interesting, the shared decision making. I'm taking a play out of the young people's playbook. It's not just your company, it's your company, but your friends and family, get them involved. So I see just a new paradigm opening up, particularly in this, and it's really powerful. It's almost a networking effect. So there's just two quick examples of how we try to do it at Deloitte. We do our best to live up to it, but it's there's no lack of need, there's no lack of opportunity, it's just a lack of time, quite honestly.
Yeah, just very quickly on, again, thinking about the Haiti situation, where we employed 50 people, and what we ended up thinking about was, well, it's good to get them employment, but what else is needed? And so we ended up talking to some of the community folks and found out that one thing that was never done, which is so, to me was unbelievable, was most of our employees had never had their vision screened. So we were like, oh wow, that's because we have another giving program that focuses on sight giving and vision. So he's like, let's get some of our partners involved here. Let's run a vision screen. We found out that over 50% of our workers couldn't see very well, which is of course an issue for productivity, quality, and so forth, but even more so for their general life. So again, that was an opportunity for us where we asked, we got input, and then it's time to act. And it didn't really take an awful lot, and now we make sure that they all have glasses. Small little thing, but it's important to ask sometimes.
That concludes the first half of the ecosystem change panel. I'd like to thank our panelists. We have a coffee break, and then
Yes, we're back here at 4:05 for this one. Come back for the second half. Please enjoy coffee.
You too.
Yeah, unfortunately, I booked a trip out to Banff and National Park, and they have like no snow. And we have it all. Yeah, so I'm going to be skiing and